Have you ever had a woman laugh at your opinion, make a sarcastic comment in front of other people, or suddenly treat you like you're not worth listening to? Most men assume they know exactly what it means. They think, she simply doesn't respect me anymore. But what if that's only part of the story? What if the behavior you're seeing is actually revealing something much deeper about her own psychology and about the dynamic between the two of you? Most men never realize this. And that's exactly why they react in ways that make the situation even worse. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When a woman belittles a man, it isn't always about hatred. It isn't always about losing attraction. And surprisingly, it isn't always because she's stronger than him. Female psychology is often far more emotional and indirect than most men imagine. The words she chooses may seem straightforward, but the emotions driving those words are rarely that simple. Think about this for a moment. Why would one woman quietly lose interest and walk away, while another stays in the relationship yet constantly criticizes, mocks, or undermines the man she's with? If she truly didn't care, why invest so much emotional energy at all? Why keep engaging instead of simply leaving? Pay close attention because this changes everything. Human behavior isn't random. Every repeated action has an emotional purpose, even when the person acting doesn't fully understand it themselves. That's especially true inside romantic relationships, where emotions often overpower logic. What appears to be disrespect on the surface may actually be hiding fear, frustration, disappointment, insecurity, resentment, or even a desperate attempt to regain emotional control. But here's where it gets interesting. Many men unknowingly train people to belittle them without ever saying a word, not because they're weak, not because they're bad men, but because certain behaviors silently communicate messages that others instinctively respond to. Once this pattern begins, it can snowball until the man starts believing something is fundamentally wrong with him, and that's the biggest mistake of all. Because confidence isn't lost in one dramatic moment. It's usually chipped away one sarcastic comment, one public correction, one dismissive eye roll at a time. Eventually, a man begins questioning his own judgment, apologizing for things that require no apology, and walking on eggshells just to avoid another confrontation. What happens next may surprise you. The more he tries to prove his worth, the less respect he often receives. It feels completely backwards, yet relationship psychology has shown this pattern over and over again. The harder he chases approval, the more the emotional balance shifts against him. So, does that mean every woman who belittles a man has lost attraction? Not necessarily. In fact, one of the biggest psychological reasons has almost nothing to do with the insults themselves. It begins much earlier, with a subtle emotional shift that most men never notice until it's far too late. And once you understand that hidden shift, you'll never look at disrespect the same way again. Now let's uncover the first hidden principle behind this behavior, and once you see it, you'll start recognizing it everywhere. Most men believe a woman belittles a man because she suddenly stopped respecting him. But in many cases, disrespect is not the starting point. It's the result of an emotional shift that has been building quietly for weeks, months, or even years. Here's what most men never realize. Women are generally more emotionally responsive than event responsive. That means they don't always react to one specific mistake. Instead, they react to the emotional pattern they've been experiencing over time. If that emotional pattern changes, their behavior changes with it. Imagine a man who starts a relationship confident, decisive, and emotionally grounded. He speaks with certainty. He has boundaries. He doesn't constantly seek validation. Naturally, the relationship feels balanced. But then life happens. Work becomes stressful. Financial pressure increases. He begins doubting himself. Instead of making decisions confidently, he starts asking for constant reassurance. Instead of expressing his opinions, he avoids conflict. Instead of leading conversations, he agrees with everything just to keep the peace. At first, these changes seem harmless, but here's where it gets interesting. The emotional dynamic has quietly shifted. Without realizing it, she's no longer responding to the man she first admired. She's responding to the uncertainty she's now feeling. And uncertainty often creates frustration before it creates understanding. That frustration can appear in subtle ways. She interrupts him more often. She rolls her eyes when he speaks. She jokes about him in front of friends. She questions decisions she once trusted. Each moment seems small on its own, but together they create a dangerous pattern. Pay close attention because this changes everything. Belittling is often less about the specific words being spoken and more about an unconscious test of emotional stability. Think about a real life example. A husband comes home after a difficult day at work. He's already exhausted. His wife makes a sarcastic comment about how he never gets anything right. Instead of calmly addressing it, he immediately becomes defensive. No, you're wrong. You always criticize me. You don't appreciate anything I do. Now, the conversation isn't about the original comment anymore. It's about emotional control. Ironically, the stronger his emotional reaction becomes, the more the original criticism appears to gain power. She now sees that a few words can completely shake his confidence. This is why many arguments repeat themselves. Not because the problem never gets solved, but because the emotional pattern never changes. Most men try to win the argument. Emotionally intelligent men focus on changing the dynamic. That's a completely different game. Another important truth is that some women don't even realize they're doing this consciously. They're reacting to emotional tension they can't fully explain. They aren't sitting down and planning to undermine a man. Instead, they're expressing unresolved emotions through criticism, sarcasm, or constant correction. This doesn't excuse disrespect, but understanding the psychology behind it gives you something far more valuable than anger. It gives you clarity, because once you understand the emotional mechanism, you stop reacting emotionally, and that's exactly where your real strength begins. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Why do some women become even more critical when a man starts trying harder to please them? On the surface, that makes absolutely no sense. Yet there's a powerful psychological explanation for it, and once you hear it, you'll understand why so many good men accidentally make the problem worse while believing they're fixing it. That's exactly what we'll uncover next. Now we arrive at one of the most misunderstood parts of female psychology. When a woman begins belittling a man, the natural instinct for many men is to work harder. They become more helpful. They apologize more often. They explain themselves in greater detail. They try to prove that they're caring, loyal, and worthy of appreciation. It sounds like the right strategy. But what happens next may surprise you. Instead of becoming warmer, she sometimes becomes even more critical. Most men never realize this because they're focused on the words. They're trying to solve the conflict on the surface. Meanwhile, the emotional dynamic underneath keeps moving in the opposite direction. Here's why. In psychology, people often place greater value on what appears emotionally stable and less value on what appears desperate for approval. This doesn't mean kindness is unattractive. It means neediness and kindness are not the same thing. There's a world of difference between helping because you genuinely choose to and helping because you're afraid of losing someone's approval. Women are remarkably sensitive to this distinction. Imagine two different men. The first man listens carefully, speaks calmly, and supports his partner because that's simply who he is. If she's unfair, he respectfully says so. If she's upset, he doesn't panic. His self-worth isn't determined by whether she's smiling every minute of the day. Now imagine the second man. Every disagreement terrifies him. Every cold response feels like rejection. He immediately changes his opinions to match hers. He over-explains every decision. He sends multiple texts after getting no reply. He apologizes even when he hasn't done anything wrong. Both men may care deeply, but emotionally, they communicate two completely different messages. The first says, I value this relationship, but I also value myself. The second quietly says, please don't stop approving of me. Pay close attention because this changes everything. Respect is deeply connected to emotional consistency. When someone constantly abandons their own boundaries just to avoid conflict, others often begin trusting their judgment less, not because they're cruel, but because confidence has become unpredictable. Here's a real life example. A couple is out with friends. During dinner, the woman jokingly says, "Don't ask him to decide, he can't even choose a restaurant." Everyone laughs. The room becomes quiet for just a second as all eyes turn toward him. This is the moment that defines the emotional dynamic. Many men immediately fire back with anger. Others force a fake laugh while quietly feeling humiliated. But the emotionally grounded man does something different. He smiles calmly and says, "Good thing I chose this restaurant tonight." No bitterness, no defensiveness, no desperate need to win, just quiet confidence. Notice what happened. He didn't attack her, he didn't attack himself. He simply refused to accept the frame that he was weak. That kind of emotional stability is incredibly difficult to shake. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Not every woman belittles because she's testing emotional strength. Sometimes the criticism has very little to do with the man at all. Sometimes she's carrying unresolved frustration from past relationships, childhood experiences, chronic stress, or unmet emotional expectations that have nothing to do with the present moment. Instead of expressing vulnerability directly, those emotions leak out through sarcasm, comparisons, constant fault finding, or subtle attempts to gain control. This is why reacting emotionally often makes the cycle worse. You're responding to the symptom instead of understanding the source. However, and this is crucial, understanding someone's psychology does not mean accepting ongoing disrespect. Compassion should never require sacrificing your dignity. The healthiest relationships are built on mutual respect, accountability, and honest communication, not silent endurance. And that brings us to the biggest turning point of all. Because there is one subtle mistake many men make the moment disrespect appears, a mistake that quietly destroys attraction, weakens boundaries, and teaches people exactly how to treat them. Once you recognize this pattern, you'll never respond to criticism the same way again. That's what we'll reveal in the next section. Now we're approaching the lesson that separates emotionally reactive men from emotionally respected men. When a woman belittles you, your first instinct is usually one of two extremes. You either explode with anger or you stay completely silent. At first glance, these seem like opposite reactions, but psychologically, they often come from the same place: fear. One man fears losing control, so he lashes out. The other fears losing the relationship, so he says nothing. Neither response solves the real problem. Most men never realize this because they believe respect is earned by either winning every argument or avoiding every argument. In reality, respect is built through emotional consistency and clear boundaries. Think about the people you've respected most in your life. Were they constantly trying to dominate everyone? Probably not. Were they afraid to speak up? Definitely not. They had something far more powerful. They knew where their boundaries were and they enforced them calmly. That's where it gets interesting. A boundary isn't a threat. It isn't punishment. It isn't an attempt to control someone else's behavior. A boundary is simply a clear statement of what you will and will not accept while remaining emotionally composed. Imagine this situation. You're having dinner together. Suddenly she says, "You're useless. I don't know why I even ask you to do anything." Many men immediately become defensive. "You always say that. You never appreciate me." "Fine, do it yourself." Within seconds, the conversation becomes a battle of emotions. But the emotionally grounded man responds differently. He looks her in the eyes and calmly says, "I'm happy to have difficult conversations, but I'm not willing to be spoken to with disrespect. When we're both calm, we can continue." Then he means it. No yelling, no insults, no begging, no dramatic exit, just calm certainty. Pay close attention because this changes everything. People quickly learn what behavior works. If disrespect consistently gets an emotional reaction, the pattern often continues. If disrespect consistently meets a calm, unwavering boundary, the dynamic begins to change. Notice something important. This approach isn't about winning against a woman. It's about refusing to lose yourself. Far too many men spend years trying to become more attractive, more successful, or more agreeable, while ignoring the one quality that silently influences every relationship: self respect. Without self respect, confidence becomes performance. With self respect, confidence becomes natural. Here's another psychological insight. Many people confuse kindness with unlimited tolerance. They're not the same thing. You can be compassionate without becoming a doormat. You can be patient without accepting repeated humiliation. You can forgive someone without allowing the same behavior to continue indefinitely. Healthy relationships require both love and limits. Without love, relationships become cold. Without limits, relationships become chaotic. The strongest men understand this balance. They don't chase conflict, but they don't run from it either. They address problems directly, respectfully, and without surrendering their identity. Now, here's the question that changes everything. What if, after you've remained calm, after you've communicated clearly, after you've enforced healthy boundaries, the disrespect still continues? Does that mean you failed? Or is the continued disrespect revealing something much bigger about the relationship itself? The answer is one of the most important lessons any man can learn. And once you understand it, you'll stop wasting years trying to earn respect from people who have already chosen not to give it. That's the final revelation, and it's where everything we've discussed comes together. Now it's time for the most important lesson in this entire discussion. Everything we've covered so far leads to this moment. When a woman repeatedly belittles a man, despite clear communication, despite healthy boundaries, and despite every reasonable effort to improve the relationship, the disrespect is no longer just a behavior. It becomes information. And that information tells you something critical. Most men spend years trying to decode every insult, every criticism, and every sarcastic remark. They analyze every conversation, wondering what they did wrong and how they can fix it. But here's the truth most men never hear. Not every problem is meant to be solved. Some problems are meant to be recognized. Pay close attention because this changes everything. A woman's behavior always reveals something. Sometimes it reveals insecurity. Sometimes it reveals frustration. Sometimes it reveals emotional wounds she hasn't healed. But sometimes it reveals something even more important. It reveals how much value she places on the relationship itself. Because when two emotionally mature people genuinely care about each other, they eventually move toward understanding. They may disagree, they may argue, they may have difficult conversations, but they don't continually destroy each other's dignity. That's the difference. The biggest mistake men make is believing respect can be negotiated. It can't. You can communicate your standards, you can enforce boundaries, you can model respectful behavior, but you cannot force someone to respect you. And the harder you chase respect, the further it often moves away. What happens next may surprise you. The moment a man truly accepts this reality, something powerful happens. He stops seeking permission to value himself. He stops measuring his worth through someone else's mood. He stops treating approval like oxygen. And suddenly, the emotional leverage disappears. This is why genuinely confident men appear different. Their confidence doesn't come from hearing compliments. It doesn't come from winning arguments. It doesn't come from controlling women. It comes from knowing who they are, regardless of how anyone treats them. That inner certainty changes everything. Because when a man values himself, he no longer tolerates patterns that slowly destroy his peace, confidence, and self respect. He doesn't become arrogant, he becomes clear. And clarity is powerful. Think back to the original question. What does it really mean when a woman belittles a man? Sometimes it means she's frustrated. Sometimes it means she's testing emotional stability. Sometimes it reflects unresolved emotional issues. Sometimes it signals a shift in relationship dynamics. And sometimes it reveals that respect has been replaced by contempt. The key is learning the difference. The emotionally intelligent man doesn't react to every insult. He observes patterns, he stays calm, he communicates directly, he maintains boundaries, and then he pays attention to what happens next. Because behavior always tells the truth. Words can be manipulated, excuses can be invented, promises can be made, but repeated behavior reveals reality. And once you understand that principle, you'll never see relationships the same way again. Remember this: a strong man isn't the man who can control a woman. A strong man is the man who can control himself. He's the man who refuses to abandon his standards. He's the man who protects his dignity without losing his composure. And he's the man who understands that true respect starts long before anyone else gives it to him. It starts with the respect he gives himself. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into female psychology, attraction, and relationship dynamics. And now tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a woman belittling you, and what do you think was really behind it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay sharp, stay confident, and remember, the strongest position a man can ever stand on is his own self-respect.